Two offer sheets were signed in the NHL on Tuesday, and today I'm talking about everything you need to know about a possible Jeremy Swayman offer sheet.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Wednesday, August 13th, and I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your day every single day. Free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Before we get started, a quick reminder to follow the podcast on social media at LockedNHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. Now, waves were made across the NHL yesterday as a pair of offer sheets were signed by the St. Louis Blues and two Edmonton Oilers restricted free agents. Now, before that happened, there was a trade involving the Blues and the Pittsburgh Penguins sending some draft picks between the two teams. A lot of people were like, why are they dealing draft picks in the middle of August? But it was so that the Blues could recoup their original pick because they were on the verge of signing these offer sheets. It was for Oilers defenseman Philip Broberg and Oilers forward Dylan Holloway, both of whom are restricted free agents. And Edmonton now has 7 days to match the offers. Now, as a refresher, a player is a restricted free agent. They can't really negotiate with other teams, but another team can approach them with an offer for them to sign. And the current team has the right to match in order to retain the player. So in this case, the Oilers have two restricted free agents. The Blues approach them with offers, and the two players sign these offers. Now, if the Oilers don't match the offer sheets, one or the other or both, the player has a new contract with the new team, and the Oilers would receive draft pick compensation based on the average annual value of the player's new contract. So in this case, Broberg got an offer of $4.58 million, and Holloway got an offer of $2.29 million. And the Blues would have to give a second and a third round pick, respectively, if the Oilers don't match. So that kind of gives you a look at what the compensation would be if the Oilers choose not to match the offer. So it's basically you're signing the player and then you have to send this draft pick in return. So it's kind of like a trade, but not really. Kind of an indirect trade. So say the Blues, say the Oilers don't choose to match on Broberg, they would get a second round pick. If they don't match on Holloway, the Oilers would get a third round pick, if that makes sense. So that's where things stand at the moment. It's a smart move by the Blues because they're taking advantage of the fact that the Oilers are already over the cap. Now, Evander Kane could be put on LTIR to make some space, but the Blues are banking on the fact that they will not match one or both, and all they have to give back is either a second or a third round pick, which isn't bad compensation for these young players. Now, what does this have to do with the Bruins? Well, it opens up the door for well, it's always been open, but it reminds us that Jeremy Swayman is vulnerable to an offer sheet the longer this contract situation goes on with the Boston Bruins. Now, here's the thing. Swayman is going to be paid a lot more than both Broberg and Holloway. In fact, more than both of those two offer sheets combined. And that, of course, raises the compensation. For example, if the offer sheet is between 6.4 and around 8.6 million, the compensation is a first, a second, and a third round pick. If the offer sheet is between 8.58 and 10.7, the compensation is 2 firsts, a second, and a third round pick. If this team decides to go over 10.7, then the compensation is 4 first round picks. So, while it's easy to see an offer sheet for kind of these up-and-coming players with a lot of promise, it's another thing to offer one to a guy who's more established, who's on the brink of superstardom, and where the compensation is going to be a first, second, third, maybe even 2 firsts, a second, and a third, heck, even maybe 4 first-round picks. So that kind of reduces the risk of a Jeremy Swayman offer sheet because the compensation would be so high, and either way, the Bruins are likely to match, unless it's in that very upper range where it would really hamstring them. As we know, the Bruins have about 8.6 in available cap space. So for a team to really be disruptive here, they would have to go in that 2 first, a second, and a third round pick range to make it a bit more difficult for the Bruins to match. Do the Bruins have reason to worry here? Are they really prone to an offer sheet? Is there any team that could even come close to making that kind of offer? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. There's a few things I enjoy in life more than going to a Major League Baseball game, getting down to the park, grabbing a drink, grabbing a hot dog, sitting down, and watching my favorite baseball team. Well, Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. They have amazing last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and a lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. I love the view from your seat. You know exactly what to expect when you get there. And with the lowest price guarantee, they'll credit you 110% of the difference if you find a seat in the same section and row for less. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets at the lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. For your next listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with a national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insight on every team in the league. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, and it's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And yesterday, 2 offer sheets signed by the St. Louis Blues and Edmonton Oilers restricted free agents, Philip Broberg at $4.8 million, Dylan Holloway at $2.29 million. And if the Oilers do not match, then they will receive a second-round pick for Broberg and a third-round pick for Holloway. Now, they're in a tight spot. They're already over the cap by about $300,000. And it made me think about Jeremy Swayman. And he's expected to sign a deal somewhere in the very low end. I would be shocked if it's close to 7, maybe $8 million, perhaps as much as 10, based on what other top players at his position make. Discussed last week how there's kind of that, Bobrovsky's at 10 million. You got a couple guys in the 9 million range, a couple guys in the 8 million range, and then it drops down to around 6. He could fit in everywhere, anywhere in that range. And again, if an offer sheet comes in between 6.4 and 8.6, it's a first, second, and third as the compensation. If it's 8.6 to 10.7, 2 firsts, a second, and a third, and then 10.7 and up, 4 first-round picks. So the compensation is predicated on the average annual value, and any team that has serious aspirations of poaching Swayman would have to come in at least that first, second, and third compensation range. And the Bruins, with 8.6 million in available cap space, would likely match that. It gets a bit trickier when it goes 8.6 and over, and 10.7 and up for them to match. But Swayman is a highly ranked goaltender. He is one of the best players at his position. Yes, he has not played a full season as a bona fide 1A, but there's every reason to believe he can and will take up that mantle and run with it now that Linus Ullmark has been traded, and with Joonas Korpisalo as his backup, not very equipped to be even in tandem with Jeremy Swayman, especially based on his numbers last season. Now, there's some teams that do have the cap space, the Buffalo Sabres, the Detroit Red Wings, Seattle Kraken among them, but they've got their own restrictive free agents to worry about. Seattle still has to sign Matty Beniers. Detroit has to sign Mo Seider and Lucas Raymond, for example. And the Buffalo Sabres, they're pretty set in net for the time being, with Ukko Pekka and Devin Levi on the up as well. The Nashville Predators have the cap space, but they don't need a goalie. They just re-upped with UC Saros, and they have Yaroslav Askarov waiting in the wings. The Islanders have the cap space. Well, they don't really have the cap space either, and neither do the Philadelphia Flyers. They're a team that could use a goalie after Carter Hart, his legal issues, but not likely that the Flyers would jump in and make a play there. Now, the one team that possibly could jump in is the Montreal Canadiens. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago. They have the cap space and the draft capital to make a little legitimate offer to Jeremy Swayman. And that would be very, very interesting. I mentioned the Flyers and the Islanders because they have the picks. They don't really have the cap space. The Flyers have a need, but they don't have the cap space. Other teams with the cap space, not really positioned to do so. Like rebuilding teams aren't going to jump in and jump at Swayman, like the Ducks or the Sharks, etc. The Canadiens, though, that's a very tantalizing prospect, seeing as they're Boston's oldest rival, and while they do have a couple, decent goaltenders in Sam Montembeault and Caden Primo, that's one position that is ripe for an upgrade. They have some very good young forwards to build around. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, Juraj Slafkovsky is going to have a major breakout this season, I believe. Kirby Dach, Alex Newhook, among the other guys already established on the roster. They've got some good young guys coming up as well. They just picked Ivan Demidov. They've got Owen Beck coming up. They also have pretty good young defense to build around as well. Mike Matheson, David Savard still on the roster, but you look at Jordan Harris, Arbor, I can't pronounce his last name, Justin Barron, Kaden Gooley, and some guys still down on the farm like Lane Hudson, David Reinbacher, Logan Mailloux. You put Swayman around that young core, and this team could become much better a lot sooner than expected. So if you look at teams with the draft capital and the salary cap space, is really only the Canadiens that could come in with an offer sheet for Swayman, and it kind of makes a lot of sense for them to do so. With Swayman stabilizing the net for this team, that would really expedite the rebuild and give them a franchise goalie to go with these young pieces that they have up front. And it would certainly reignite the Bruins-Canadiens rivalry. And the Canadiens aren't really adverse to signing an offer sheet. We all remember the Jesper Kotkaniemi, Sebastian Aho debacle where the Hurricanes signed Kotkaniemi from the Canadiens after the Habs had attempted to sign Aho as an RFA the year prior. That whole thing was instigated by the Canadiens trying to sign Aho. So it's quite possible that the Canadiens are at least considering the possibility of signing Jeremy Swayman to an offer sheet. Is it likely? I mean, no. Is it possible? Very much so. And it's something that the Bruins should be wary of and should be looking to sign Swayman as soon as possible, just to kind of quell any concerns about a Swayman offer sheet. Now, would they match? I mean, yeah. They likely would match at any rate. The 4 first-round picks would be pretty tantalizing. Even the 2 firsts, a second and a third. We know they've had a lack of draft capital built up over the last several years. They could really use an inflection of picks to start building that prospect pool, and especially if it's from a team that might not make the playoffs, even if they had Jeremy Swayman. But at the same time, it would be a tough pill to swallow to allow Swayman to walk and only have Korpisalo and Bussy, maybe Michael DiPietro to work with here in net for the Boston Bruins. That would really make them a team that would be on the outside looking in. They just invested a ton in Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov, and therefore they're not likely to be taking a step back anytime soon. Losing Swayman certainly would be that. Now, what is the status of Jeremy Swayman's contract? Well, team CEO Charlie Jacobs had something to say about that the other day, and we'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into an MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. The eBay Guaranteed Fit is available only to U.S. customers. All right, the absolute latest on Jeremy Swayman's contract situation is there's not really much going on. Bruins CEO and alternate governor Charlie Jacobs was on WEEI, Nesson, Jimmy Fund Radio Telethon, gave a minor update on negotiations with the star goalie. He said, quote, "I try not to comment on player personnel contract negotiations. We are still negotiating with Sway." This was on the Gresh and Fourier show per WEEI. He added, quote, "I hope that he's ready to play come training camp. We have some things to work out. I'm sure we will get there." End quote. Jacobs did add that if there was any unfinished business for the Bruins this summer, it's signing Swayman to a contract extension. Well, of course. This comes after former Bruins goalie and Nesson analyst Andrew Raycroft wasn't worrying about not having a deal yet because until we get into September, there's still quite a bit of time to get things done. Jacobs also admitted that the team is close to an agreement. So whatever that means. It could be today, it could be tomorrow, but hopefully it gets done sooner than later. So yeah, that's the absolute latest that we have here from the Bruins and Jeremy Swayman. Will Swayman be one of the highest paid goalies in the NHL? It's quite possible. Even if he were to make around $6.5 million, that would make him the 6th highest paid goalie in the NHL. If he lands in the high fives, he would still be top 10. It looks as though he is wanting to be in that top tier, and rightfully so. He's been excellent since day one as a member of the Boston Bruins. Does he belong in the Bobrovsky, Vasilevsky range? What about the Hellebuck range, who just signed a new contract? Well, let's be real. He doesn't have much hardware to his name apart from that William Jennings trophy a couple years ago that he shared with Linus Ullmark. He doesn't have a Vezina nod. He doesn't have a Stanley Cup or a Conn Smythe like some of these other guys. So when it comes to his valuation, it's still kind of predicated on potential at this point. It's still kind of predicated on who they believe Jeremy Swayman can and will become. And there's every reason to believe that he will be a top goalie in the NHL. And there's every reason to believe that he indeed already is a top goalie in the NHL. Where that falls in terms of actual value or potential, I don't think there's going to be a drop off. I don't think there's a huge risk in terms of signing him to a big time contract and then Cinderella's wagon turns back into a pumpkin. I don't see that happening. I think it's a very worthwhile investment to pay him at least that $8 million range. I'm sure they want to leave some flexibility for some PTOs or for some minimum level contracts. We talked about it the other day with perhaps circling back on James Van Riemsdyk or Kevin Shattenkirk, or signing a value guy like Philip Zadina or Kyler Yamamoto. Maybe even, we'll talk about this later on this week, bringing Blake Wheeler back as a veteran presence. The Bruins want that flexibility. Swayman wants to get paid, and we'll see here where they land. But in terms of an offer sheet, unless the Montreal Canadiens come out swinging and throw some gas on this fire that is their rivalry, it's kind of, some embers at the moment. It's not really strong, but if they were to do this, it would just blow it right back up. And a real statement from Swayman to sign that offer sheet as well. Who knows? Maybe he's been approached with one and just hasn't signed it yet. So we'll see where that comes in. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen today. Please do subscribe to the podcast if you have not already. We're Locked On Boston Bruins. We talk about your favorite hockey team every day, available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. And we'll be back here soon with a fresh episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now go check out Locked On NHL, check out Locked On Red Sox, Locked On Celtics, Locked On Patriots for all the latest in terms of local sports coverage. Thanks a lot, friends. Talk to you again here next time.